No better day to discuss the future of aviation safety with the head of the EASA, Patrick Key, today after his agency announced that the formal process to get the Boeing 737 MAX ungrounded or recertified has officially started today, and we're excited to learn from Patrick what next steps will have to happen until we see the jet in Europe's skies again. Do we have Patrick on the line? Patrick, can you hear me? Very good. Good afternoon. Before we start talking business, here's my icebreaker question for you, so to say. Have you personally actually ever flown on a 737 MAX following its groundings? And if not, what do you think your feelings will be once you set foot into one and actually fly with it?
Well, of course, when it was grounded, I could not fly any, but I flew several simulator sessions on the MAX in order to understand what this was about. And I will be very happy when I'm able to fly again in a commercial flight of a MAX, so I will feel happy.
So it will be a first for you as well once we see it up in the air. Very good.
Yes, it will.
Can you walk us through the process, what formally has to happen until we see the plane again crossing European skies?
Okay, so in fact, we made it clear that after the two tragic accidents which happened almost 2 years ago on the MAX, we wanted to have 4 points to be covered before we would accept to unground the aircraft. The first point was to understand deeply the root causes for the two accidents, and that we, I think, know quite well what happened during the two accidents. The second point was that we should independently certify all the changes made by Boeing in order to solve the root causes for the accident, and that's something that we did extensively. The third item was that we would independently recertify or review the safety of what we call critical systems, and in particular in the flight controls of the aircraft. So beyond just the corrections of the bugs or of the deficiencies that triggered the accidents, we wanted to look at all the behavior of the aircraft, in particular the flight controls, and that we have done. And the last point was that we wanted to make sure that operators, pilots would be well trained in order to take this aircraft to the air. And on this fourth item, we are satisfied as well. So since those 4 points are satisfied, we have entered now in the more formal consultation in order to launch the ungrounding phase of the aircraft, and that's the publication of what we call a provisional airworthiness directive, which is basically saying everything which needs to take place on board the aircraft, but also in terms of training for the pilots. This was published today. There are legally 28 days for people to comment and react to this provisional airworthiness directive. Then we should have 2 to 3 weeks in order to work on those comments and propose answers to those comments, and then publish the final formal airworthiness directive. So we expect this to be towards the middle of January. And then we will need to coordinate with all the national authorities, with all the member states of the EU, in order for them to make sure that, in particular, all the training requirements are taken care of, but also that all the operations that have been identified in our airworthiness directive are actually being taken on board by the operators.
So in practice, for an airline in Europe, when will they likely have the jet at their disposal again?
Well, they can start basically by the end of January. But the training requirements are quite known, so they can anticipate and start to train their pilots on those. There are a certain number of software and hardware upgrades which need to be done on the aircraft. So depending on when this can take place, as soon as all those things have taken place, they can operate the aircraft again.
Aren't you, I wonder, kind of glad that at the moment the airlines, from a demand perspective, don't really need the 737 MAX, given the COVID situation? I can only imagine what kind of pressure you must be under to get the plane back in the air if we had not had this situation. So I guess Boeing and airline customers would have called you every day and say, guys, can you speed up this process? I mean, I wonder, you're an agency, you should be immune to that kind of pressure, but you guys are also human. So how did you, was there any room for balancing that, or did you have to say, no, it's safety first and second and third, and then everything else comes later?
So Richard, I can assure you that before the COVID crisis, we were under a lot of pressure from a number of operators to speed up our work. But that's something we are used to. So we are humane, as you said, human beings, but we are immune to this kind of pressure. And that's what is good in EASA, which is that we are a technical agency. So we are immune to political pressure or to social pressure, let's say. So I cannot be glad for the COVID crisis, of course. But what I can say is that the current situation enables airlines to take a bit more time to train properly their pilots, and that makes things easier. Let's say that we don't have a giant, massive bottleneck for the training of pilots is going to make things easier, I believe.
And certifying aircraft in Europe won't stop there. Boeing in particular has the next large passenger aircraft coming up. It looks like it's going to be about 2 years from now, the 777X. I'm wondering what the learnings from the 737 MAX are that you can apply to the 777X. Are you telling Boeing, guys, you better plan 3 or 6 months longer for us Europeans to thoroughly check your plane, because we're not just going to sign off on it like it was customary in the past?
So as always in aviation, whenever there are accidents, we are learning from our deficiencies or accidents. And there were lessons learned also for us internally on how we conduct certification. There were things that we are going to change in the way we certify the aircraft. And there are ways in which we will change also the way in which we work with Boeing and the FAA. And we are currently starting to discuss with our partners on those lessons learned, on what needs to be done in the short term, medium term, and longer term. I don't want to go too much into details, but there are quite a few lessons learned that the community has gathered. We are currently discussing with Boeing on the planning for the 777X in order to arrive to something which makes sense, which is sensible, and which is not putting too much pressure either on them or on us, because I think that the launch customer is a European. So I think we are going to need to discuss in a concrete manner, what is the time frame we are talking about, and we have started to do that with our colleagues from Boeing.
So I understand the launch customer is in this country, actually. I think it's Deutsche Lufthansa. So there will be this plane will be certified in the US first, and then there will be a delay of a couple of months before it's certified in Europe. That doesn't make sense in this case.
Not necessarily. We could, it depends a lot on how things go. If we agree with our colleagues from the FAA that there are things that we should do together, there are things that we can do in parallel between the FAA and us, so we don't need to do things in sequence. And actually, for a number of aircraft, we tried to have a certification in the US and in Europe in a similar time frame. So that's really something that we need to discuss with Boeing, with the FAA, and agree on a time frame which is acceptable for all parties.
So let's talk about the current situation. We all, or the industry, suffers from the pandemic, and I wonder how international air traffic can be strengthened from the perspective of EASA now that we at least have a vaccine, let's say, in sight.
So I'm not a medical expert. It's very good news that we have now 3 vaccines which seem to be available or will be available soon. What matters then is how the community can manage the risk of transmission of the disease. And you know, that's really something that we are trying to use in the way in which passengers are processed through this crisis. It is to use a risk management approach, which is the risk management approach that we use for safety. There is no zero risk. Huh? You have a zero risk in flying when you stay on the ground, basically. So there is no zero risk of non-contamination through aviation of different countries. It's just a matter of how effective can we be in managing this risk. And there are a certain number of actions that we can take, quarantine, tests, you know, all measures to be taken on board the aircraft, but also in the passenger processes at the airport. And vaccine is yet another complementary measure which can be used in order to reduce the risk. But then, you know, we enter into very difficult modeling studies where you would need to look at what is the percentage of people who can get the vaccine, what is the percentage of travelers in which countries, how would this percentage be taken into account by the receiving health authority for them not to take into account or implement extra measures such as quarantine and testing and so on and so forth. So I think we will need to work a lot on all those data and build some scenario for the recovery of air transport.
So the problem is a bit that air traffic by definition is an international business, but local health rules, local health authorities are very, very regional, and that has to find a common denominator.
It is indeed the major problem that we are facing today, which is that the measures which are taken in the country are towards aviation are not necessarily taking into account the real risk of importing the disease through aviation, but they are taken also for national political reasons. And I would just give you an example. We are working with our colleagues from the ECDC, the European Center for Disease Control, and we will publish guidelines next week on those measures, quarantine versus testing and so on and so forth. But one of the key outcomes of our work, which is based on statistical evidence, is to say that if you have 2 countries which have an equivalent level of risk, so you know in the 2 red zones, typically countries, it is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense to impose quarantine on the receiving part, because the risk is the same as in the giving part. So those are the things where, you know, we need to have more European harmonization, more European approach to managing the risk. And you can understand that if you are a green country, in order to be able to receive safely, let's say, passengers coming from a red country, you would impose some measures. But if you are green and you are receiving passengers coming from a green country, there is no reason to impose any kind of restrictions. Or even worse, if you are a red country and you are receiving passengers from an orange or a green country, there is no reason to impose any kind of restrictions. And that's not what is being done today.
Finally, let me ask you to finish my question. I'm going to throw 1 or 2 questions at you, and I'm going to ask you to finish it. The first one goes, the pandemic will bring aviation safety something good if?
The pandemic will bring aviation safety something good if we do not forget that safety is the highest priority in our sector.
Second one is the grounding of the 737 MAX, and everything that followed will make flying in general safer in the future because?
So every tragedy is making flying safer. So we learned a lot on the way in which we certify aircraft. We learned a lot on the way we work together with the industry, with our colleagues from the FAA. And because of all the lessons learned, I think the landscape will be safer in the future.
So thank you very much for your time. Patrick Key, the Executive Director of EASA. I understand here we will have a virtual coffee break and you can network in the meantime, and we should be back in pretty much about 30 minutes.